Hello and welcome to Freedom Watch, your daily dose of raw liberty online at foxnews.com/freedomwatch. I'm Judge Andrew Napolitano here, defending freedom, defending your natural rights, and defending your right to have a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution. We live in a time when more and more of our private data is collected and kept on file by private organizations, keeping track of our purchases and our medical information, and also by the government, which keeps track of our incomes, our taxes, our home addresses, and the size and composition of our households. Since the passage of the Real ID Act in 2005, it has also been legal for the federal government to implement a national ID card, though the states have resisted assisting in the program due to the costs. That could change as a side effect of a current immigration reform legislation. As a result of legislation introduced by Senators Lindsey Graham, a Republican, and Charles Schumer, a Democrat, we may not only have a national ID card, but a biometric ID card, which would include an individual's unique biological information, such as fingerprints and retina scans and medical information. Does the government have the right to keep and store personal information about us? Can the police demand to see such an ID card whenever they want? My next guest, John Whitehead, president of the Rutherford Institute, is as troubled by these trends, especially the biometric ID card, as I am. John, welcome to Freedom Watch.
Thank you, sir.
Where would the government get the authority, even from its own big government point of view, to require us to carry something the size of a credit card with medical, personal, and legal information on there, accessible by anybody from the government that asked for it and swiped it onto a reader?
Well, you know, also on these cards, eventually, as I argue in the commentary I wrote that you guys picked up on, is that it'll have other information such as your business information, financial information, and of course, employers are required under this law to have machine-readable scanners so that there'll be anybody that wants a job in this country will have to have one of these cards scanned by an employer. Where do they get the authority? They're just taking the authority. I mean, today the government just assumes it has the right to move forward, either based on an influx of illegal aliens or crazy things like the guy with the lighter fluid in his underwear on Christmas Day. They want to implement all these particular programs, but we just recently wrote a letter, the Rutherford Institute with ACLU, to the White House and various Senate and House committees saying we think this is the ultimate tracking device because, as I argue, eventually this card will have an RFID tag on it, which is a small, you know, about the size of a pinprick radio device which emits a radio signal. So wherever you are, that card will be beeping. The government will know wherever you are.
All right, so these losses of liberty, John, you know this because you litigate this stuff for a living. They don't happen overnight. They happen gradually. First, we have a problem with illegal immigrants, and Arizona is in an uproar. You may have your opinion on that statute. In my view, it's highly unconstitutional.
I think it's an awful statute law. Yeah.
And some will say, okay, these people need ID cards. And then a court will say, well, you can't give ID cards. You can't require ID cards just from a class of people. You have to require ID cards from everybody or nobody. At least that's the argument of Lindsey Graham, the so-called conservative Republican, and Chuck Schumer, the acknowledged and true liberal Democrat, when they say, well, you have to have an ID card in order to get a job. Pretty soon you'll have to have an ID card in order to exist in the United States. The government has no authority to require us to carry this. It has no authority to have knowledge of our medical and legal information, and it certainly has no authority to track our whereabouts, but it will try. Why will it try? Why does the government want to know this about us?
Well, it's control. I mean, we're again, technology. Technology is moving so fast, and technology, as you know, is not discriminating. When a surveillance camera, for example, views a park full of people, it doesn't distinguish between the crook and the innocent. But eventually, all this information is going to be there'll be a huge database created by the government, which will cost a lot of money. In other words, taxpayers are going to fund a way to track them, to keep information on them, and all this will be available to the police. The police will end up showing up at your employer who's scanned all this information in and knows all your information and the bank records. We know all that with the U.S. Patriot Act, but I mean, this is the ultimate bypass of the Fourth Amendment, in my opinion. It basically renders the Fourth Amendment unreasonable search and seizure, collecting information without a warrant, basically null and void.
We are chatting with John Whitehead, who is the president of the Rutherford Institute. You anticipated my next question. Is that when I speak to a lot of groups, Tea Party groups, people interested in freedom, I often comment that after the right to life, the greatest right is the right to be left alone, which is basically the right to privacy, which is basically the right codified by the Fourth Amendment. Is there a right to privacy left? Did the Republicans with the Patriot Act instill in America a value that privacy is no longer worth protecting?
I think absolutely, yeah. And I argue this with the surveillance cameras, which are everywhere, and they're going to increase in the United States. When you're being watched by the government, being tracked with a national ID card, you are a suspect. So we live in what I would call a modern surveillance state where we're all suspects.
What do we do to stop this?
Well, I get a hold of your representatives right away and say, if they're going to pass an immigration bill, you don't want this to be part of it. And again, I think it's the end run. They bumped up against state resistance to the Real ID Act, and now this is another way to get a national ID card, and that's exactly what's happened here.
The state resistance to the Real ID Act has another benefit, too. It's almost a form of state nullification of an unconstitutional federal law in which the feds have basically commandeered the state legislatures and said, you will issue this kind of a card, you will have this kind of information, and you will pay for it out of your own tax dollars. But you're right, this Lindsey Graham, Chuck Schumer thing is an end run around that, because this would force private employers to pay for all of this in accordance with federal specifications.
And the thing is, if you don't have a biometric card, if you refuse to do it based on religious reasons or whatever, you become a non-person. You won't be able to work, travel, buy, sell, access health care, and so on. So you, in effect, become a non-person.
I would like to think, and I would like to hope, that some of my former colleagues who are wearing black robes would simply say, enough is enough. There is no authority in the Constitution for the federal government or any government to require you to carry anything or to reveal this kind of information or to make it available to anybody from the government whenever they want it. And when and if we ever reach that time where the government claims it has that authority, the basic American values of the primacy of the individual are gone. We're no longer the country that Jefferson and the other framers left us.
Well, as you point out in your book, A Nation of Sheep, we have to wake up. People are asleep. These are the kind of things that we need to jump up and scream about, to contact our representatives, and if need be, get out in the streets and march on it. I mean, that's what it's come to. We've come to a point where government basically doesn't work for us anymore, and we have to fight back with lawsuits, contact groups like this. The ACLU is fighting this, so there are a lot of good people out there fighting this. Groups like the ACLU, when they fight something like this and they're for immigration reform, it's pretty bad.
Absolutely. John Whitehead, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, sir.